I'm not a Carson Beck fan. I don't think that he is nearly as good as you've probably been led to believe. I think he makes careless decisions with the football. I think he sometimes holds on to the football too long. And yet, I can't help but deny that he has played relatively well through the first 4 weeks of the college football season against what has been a somewhat sneaky, decent schedule thus far. They played Notre Dame and a USF squad that was ranked when they came to Miami. They've also played the Florida Gators. And then there's the Bethune-Cookman game that isn't going to be viewed as some gigantic juggernaut triumph by any stretch of the imagination. But all things considered, you got 2 games against ranked opponents and 2 games that aren't against ranked opponents. And I thought that that was an interesting exercise because generally you would think that when the competition gets tougher, stats would go down, that your production wouldn't be as high as it was against a struggling Florida Gators team and an FCS opponent in Bethune-Cookman. But I think that you might be genuinely surprised by the split that Carson Beck has had versus AP top 25 teams versus teams that are not ranked in the AP top 25. For instance, if you were to look at those splits against not ranked teams, Carson Beck has completed 82% of his passes this season, which is really good. If you look through the annals of college football history, Carson Beck's in the top 25 of the most accurate passers of all time. Let me rephrase that. He is in the top 25 of the highest completion percentage, because I do think that there is a difference between completion percentage and accuracy, right? For instance, I talked about Jeremiah Smith and Jeremiah Love earlier this week about guys that I think should be getting Heisman Trophy consideration that aren't just quite yet. I think you would probably agree that you don't have to be the most accurate passer to complete the football to Jeremiah Smith. You throw the ball in his area, and you got to feel pretty decent that guy's going to come down with a football. And it's been a somewhat similar thing with wide receivers that Carson Beck has played with. For instance, if he had been at Miami last year instead of this year, if he had just thrown the ball to Xavier Restrepo, you got to feel pretty good that guy's going to come down with it. So there is a difference, in my opinion, between completion percentage and accuracy, especially if you are throwing the ball at the line of scrimmage, behind it, or 3 yards down the field. Shedeur Sanders is the most accurate passer in college football history, according to the stats. Is that true, or did he have the highest completion percentage? That's my rant for the day. But against not top 25 teams, Carson Beck has completed 82% of his passes. And you might think and expect that number to drop drastically against top 25 opponents. It really hasn't. It's at 74%. And you might think an 8% drop is drastic. I don't think it is when you go from HBCU versus Notre Dame and a top 25 ranked South Florida. The average yards per completion, 12 yards against non-ranked teams, 10 yards against ranked opponents. But the biggest, perhaps, difference that I see and go, really? He's thrown more touchdowns against top 25 teams than non-top 25 teams. Same amount of interceptions, by the way. But that's a different discussion for a different day. More touchdowns against top 25 teams than against non-top 25 teams. Now, there are all sorts of variables that you can throw in there that, like, hey, they're beating the tar out of they're beating the just bejesus out of Bethune-Cookman, or they expect to beat the bejesus out of Bethune-Cookman. We don't need to be chucking the pigskin around. But the point still stands. Carson Beck, for all intents and purposes, has played as well against the most difficult opponents on his schedule than he has against the Cupcakes. Now, their Cupcakes of Florida, I don't believe by any stretch of the imagination is a quote-unquote cupcake. But for this exercise, they are. And he's played as well against top 25 teams as he has against not top 25 teams. Now, make no mistake about it, Miami is going to need him to play well and likely better than he has played against Florida State on Saturday, which could be the biggest and best game of the weekend. I'm really looking forward to it because I think it has the potential, because I think Florida State matches up relatively well with Miami. And I think that in spite of all those stats I've just listed off, in spite of all those things that say, hey, I think, despite all those things that would tell you, Miami's really good. And I've heard people talk about how Miami, in their eyes, should be viewed in the same vein and categories as national championship favorites, along with the likes of Ohio State and Oregon. I'm not there yet. And I think I could get there depending on how or what they do against Florida State. But for instance, the last time we saw them, because they're coming off a bye week, they never wanted to take the game from Florida. They never wanted to just win the damn game. Florida had no intention or interest in winning that game. And yet Miami never put their foot on the gas, never put their foot on Florida's neck and just said, this is it. Put the pillow over their face and end it. They never did that. And I think that that's something that you learn how to do. And I know that that's cliche. The coaches will tell you, oh, we've got to learn how to win. And then you're like, what does that entail? And they're like, well, if I know, I don't know. You figure it out. I'm like, okay, well, I think that there is some truth there, but what does that look like? They didn't have that like assassin mentality of, we're going to drive the nail in the coffin. That's going to do it. We'll see you later. They let Florida kind of hang around until the fourth quarter when there was a pretty big discrepancy in structure and purpose and talent, frankly. And so that's my big concern is on the road, hostile environment against a rival, a team who has a marquee win of their own against Alabama in a similar situation earlier this season, but is coming off a loss. Are you ripe for an upset? Because it feels like that's kind of the math that goes into it, doesn't it? A team that's got something to prove at home against a top 5 opponent, and that top 5 opponent has not put teams away that they should have put away. That feels like you're kind of baking a cake asking for an upset. Couple that with, to his credit, he has been basically on par with his interceptions from last season, Carson Beck, that is, where last year, that was Carson Beck's problem, was he was too cavalier with the football. He turned it over all the time. 28 touchdowns to 12 interceptions is not a great ratio. And right now, he's at 7 touchdowns to 3 interceptions through 4 games. I'm not a surgeon brain, but through 4 games, 3 interceptions, that means you're on pace to throw exactly the same thing you did last year, 28 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. So while Carson Beck has played perfectly fine, adequate, whatever the case may be, I don't think he can play adequate and also beat Florida State. I don't think he can be good or good enough to win that game. So I'm going to be glued to my seat to watch just how that all shakes out, because I'm insanely interested to see whether or not he rises to the occasion. Because there are people who will tell you he is one of the best quarterbacks in the country, yada, yada, yada. He should be a Heisman Trophy candidate. And I'm not there. And I know that it's easy to sit here and be like, oh, this guy sucks. I think there's more to it than that. But when your bugaboo has been, you don't really care if you throw interceptions or not, and you still have that problem at times. I don't think you can have that problem in a game on the road against a top 25 team and what is your team's chief rival. I don't think you can do that. And so I'm interested in mindset as much as production. because you can tell intent with throws. You can tell intent with the way the offense operates and all of those things. And I'm interested to see how the intent, attitude, and mindset looks for Carson Beck on Saturday. Because if they're not in the right place, I don't think it's a fun Saturday in Tallahassee for the Hurricanes. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. I appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you get all the great college football content we're pumping out. If you're listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. I'll see you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.